"Load it in the yard, not in the box," said the Duke of Rathborne. "He is not to hear it." The gun was brought. Corvus, who had cost 1,100 guineas and had broken a groom's collarbone in April and put another man into the infirmary at Chettleworth in June, stood black and enormous in the loose box at the end of the range with his head in the corner. And Tancred, 6th Duke of Rathborne, stood in the doorway of his own stable, and understood that he was about to destroy the best animal he had ever bought because 6 men, 2 of them famous, could not get a bridle on it. Then somebody touched his sleeve. He turned with the intention of saying something unforgivable, and found a young woman in a dairy apron, with a wooden yoke still on her shoulders and 2 cans of milk swinging from it, and she was shaking her head at him. Not timidly. She shook her head the way a magistrate refuses a bribe. "You are from the dairy," said Tancred. She nodded once. Then she set the yoke down against the wall, took a small slate out of her apron pocket, wrote on it with a stub of chalk, and turned it round. "Not his temper, his eye." "His eye," Tancred said. She wrote again, "Right side, he cannot see. Watch where they go at him." "Your Grace," said Fenner, the head groom, coming up fast, "that is Zillah Vale out of the dairy. She has no business here, and she is dumb besides. Fever at 14, they say. Not a word out of her in 7 years. 9, Tancred said, reading the slate, "if I may judge by the spelling, which is better than yours." He handed the slate back to her. "Show me." What she did next took 4 minutes, and he thought about it for the rest of his life. She did not go into the box. She walked slowly along the outside of the range to the far end, so that Corvus could see her the whole way with his left eye, and she stopped 6 feet from the half-door and stood still with her hands loose and her body turned a little away, looking at the wall. She did not click her tongue or hold out a hand or make any of the noises men make at horses. She simply stood there and let a great deal of time go by. Corvus lifted his head. The near ear came round. Then the animal that 6 men had been unable to touch since March walked 4 steps across its box and put its nose out over the half-door into the empty air where she was not quite standing. She stepped in under it, still not looking, and breathed out slowly through her nose, and the horse breathed back at her. Fenner said something under his breath about the devil. The Duke of Rathborne said, "Take the gun back to the house." She would not come out of the dairy on his authority, which surprised him. She came out of it on a written condition, presented the next morning on the slate, in a hand that was careful and small and entirely unafraid. "I will do it if no man in the stable touches him without my seeing. Not Mr. Fenner, not you, 3 weeks, wages the same. I keep my place in the dairy if it fails." Tancred read it twice and signed his name under it with the chalk, which was, he supposed, the least dignified contract he had ever entered into, and the only one anybody afterwards remembered. The first week she did almost nothing, and it nearly drove him out of his senses. She sat on an upturned bucket inside the box with her back against the wall for 2 hours at a time, mending stockings. She did not look at the horse. When Corvus came and stood over her, enormous, ears flat, a black head as long as her arm, she went on mending, and after a while the ears came up and the horse went away again and ate its hay. On the 4th day she wrote, "Look at his mouth. Bring a lantern." She held the lantern, Tancred in his shirt-sleeves, holding the great black head with his own hands, looked into a mouth that had been ruined. The bars were scarred over on both sides, old healed ridges of them, the tongue notched, and behind it all a swollen redness where a sharp curb chain had been used and used and used. He straightened up slowly. "Crail," he said. She wrote, "The man who sold him to you had him broke by somebody in a hurry." Then she wiped it and wrote, A horse with one eye and a mouth like that will fight anything that comes at his blind side with a bit in its hand. He is not dangerous. He is guessing. Mr. Ambrose Crail, horsebreaker to 3 earls and a marquis, had spent 9 days at Rathborne in the spring, had declared Corvus vicious and unmakeable, and had been paid 40 guineas for the opinion. Tancred remembered him standing in this yard with a coiled rope, and saying that some brutes want breaking and some want shooting. "Miss Vale," he said, "who taught you horses?" The chalk moved for a long time before she showed him. "My father, Josiah Vale, breaker at Wenmore. He worked slow and men laughed at him for it. A colt went over on him in the sale yard when I was 14 and I was there. I have not talked since, not because I cannot, because I found I had nothing I wanted to say to people." Tancred stood in the straw with a lantern in his hand. "And to horses," he said. She looked up at him with an expression he could not read at all, and wrote, "They do not require it." He came down to the stable every day after that, and he told himself it was the 1100 guineas. In the second week, she long-reined the stallion in the paddock, working always where he could see her, teaching him with the whole length of her body and a soft rope, and an unbelievable quantity of patience that nothing was going to come at him out of the dark on his right. She had a broad, plain snaffle made up by the saddler with thick, smooth bars, and she showed the Duke of Rathborne how to hold it in his fist so that it could not touch the scars, and he found that he was being instructed by a dairymaid on a slate, and that he did not mind it in the smallest degree. And because she never answered, he began to talk. He had not intended to. He told her about the 1100 guineas, and then about his father, who had ridden well and drunk worse. And then, on a wet Thursday, sitting on a corn bin while she oiled a rein, he told her about his brother Denholm, who had gone out on the ice at the lake at Rathborne when they were 9 and 11, and had not come back off it, and how Tancred had been the elder, and had said the ice was thick enough. She did not write anything for a while. Then she showed him the slate. "You were 11. I was the elder." She wiped it and wrote, "My father said, never let a horse learn a thing from you when you are frightened. He never said what to do about the ones you learn from yourself." Tancred sat on the corn bin in a wet coat and discovered that his eyes were stinging, and that, for the first time in 29 years, somebody had told him something true about it, in chalk, in a stable, without a single word being spoken aloud. The county heard of it, of course, and the county enjoyed it. At the Rathborne autumn meeting, with 14 carriages in the drive and half the neighborhood eating cold beef on his lawn, Lady Sowerby asked the Duke, at the top of her considerable voice, whether it was true that his stud was now managed by a mute dairymaid, and whether she gave her orders in chalk or in dumb show. "On a slate, madam," said Tancred, "which has the advantage that they are legible, and the further advantage that she is right." His mother spoke to him that night in the long gallery, kindly, and much worse than Lady Sowerby. That a duke of 9 and 30 must think of the succession. That a girl of that sort, however clever with animals, could not be brought into a drawing-room. That people were beginning to say things that could not be unsaid. "What are they saying?" "That you go to the stables at 7 in the morning and again after dinner," said his mother, "and that when you come back your face is different." Tancred did not answer that, because it was true, and because he had been avoiding the fact for a fortnight. Crail came back on the last day of the 3 weeks, uninvited, with 2 men and a coiled rope, on the pretext of a horse he had left in the far pasture, and Tancred was told of it too late. What happened in the yard, he did not see the beginning of. He came out of the harness room at the shouting, and found the range gate standing wide, a water bucket kicked over, one of Krail's men up on the mounting block, Krail himself with a rope in his hand and a twitch in his pocket, and Corvus loose on the cobbles, wheeling, blind side out, between the open yard gate and 11 of the Duke's guests coming round the corner from the lawn. Tancred went for the horse's head. It was the wrong thing. He knew it as he did it. He had been told for 3 weeks never to come at the right side, and he came at it because his guests were behind him and a woman in a pale gown had screamed. A hand caught his coat sleeve and pulled him back with unexpected strength. Zillah Vale walked out onto the cobbles between the stallion and the gate. She did not run. She turned her shoulder to him and dropped her eyes to the ground and stood, in a dairy apron, with a horse of 17 hands wheeling 6 feet away, and everyone in that yard holding their breath. "Stand," she said. It was the first word anybody at Rathborne had heard out of her mouth. It was low and rusty, and it went across those cobbles like a hand laid flat on water. Corvus stopped. His off ear was searching. His near eye found her. She let out one long breath and lifted her palm slowly to where he could see it, and the black head came down into her hand and stayed there, and she stood with her forehead against the hollow of his cheek, while the whole party on the gravel stared. Then she turned her face towards Mr. Ambrose Krail. "You put a curb on a one-eyed horse," she said, "and cut his mouth to ribbons on his blind side, and told this house he was vicious, and took 40 guineas for it. And you have come back to make him bad again in front of company, so that nobody would ever ask what you had done." Krail said something about the girl being hysterical. "Mr. Krail," said the Duke of Rathborne, in a voice that emptied the yard of every other sound, "you will be off my land in 10 minutes, and I shall write to Chettleworth, and to Lord Mears, and to every man in England who has ever paid you, and I shall enclose the saddler's bill for the bit this woman had made because yours had ruined a horse's mouth. Fenner, the gate." He turned round to find that his guests had heard all of it, and that his mother was standing on the gravel with her hand at her throat, and that Zillah Vale was leading 1,100 guineas worth of stallion back into its box on a slack rope, as though she were carrying in the washing. He went to the stable at 9 that night. She was sitting on the upturned bucket. The slate lay on her knee, unused. "You could speak," said Tancred. "Yes. For 9 years. There was nothing I wanted to say." She was looking at the straw. "And then there was, and it was to a horse in front of 40 people, and I have quite ruined myself, your grace, because they will all want me to do it again now, like a fair." "Miss Vale." He came and stood in front of her, and then, because he had not the smallest idea how to do this, he sat down in the straw with his back against the partition, which no Duke of Rathborne had done in the history of the house. "I have talked to you for 3 weeks. I have told you about my father, and about my brother on the ice, and about the 1,100 guineas, and about being 9 and 30 and afraid of nothing except a quiet house. You have answered me in chalk, and you have never once flattered me, and you have twice told me I was wrong when I was wrong. And this evening you took hold of my coat, and pulled me out of the way of the only thing on this estate that could have killed me." She said nothing. Her hands were quite still in her lap. "I am going to say a thing badly," he said. "Marry me." The rain went on in the gutters for a long moment. "I am out of the dairy," she said. "I know exactly where you are out of. They will say you married a dumb girl for a horse. Will say a great deal, and none of it will be to my face, and none of it will last." He turned his head to look at her. "I do not want a hostess. Rathborne has had 11 hostesses, and no one in it has been happy since my mother came here as a bride. I want the person who sits on a bucket for 2 hours mending stockings until a frightened animal decides she is safe. I have been in that box, Zillah. I know what it is to be the thing everybody has given up on and shot at from the blind side." She turned her face away, and he thought for a moment that he had lost it entirely. Then she put her hand out sideways into the straw, palm up, exactly as she had held it up to the horse, and waited for him to come to her, and he did. They were married in the winter, in the small church at Rathborne, and she said the words in that low, rusty voice, so that every soul in the building heard them. And afterwards nobody could remember what the county had been so amused about. She did not become talkative. She never became talkative. She spoke perhaps 40 sentences a week for the rest of her life, and the household learned that, when the Duchess of Rathborne said something, it was because it needed saying, and the effect on a dinner table was remarkable. She took the stud. Rathborne bred and broke horses on her method for 30 years slow, unfashionable, and unbeatable, and men who had laughed on the lawn sent their difficult animals up the drive with notes begging her to look at them, and she looked at all of them, and charged the rich ones handsomely and the poor ones nothing. Corvus went to grass at last in the near paddock, blind in the right eye and perfectly sound in the temper, and lived to be 23. And in the Duke's study at Rathborne, in a frame of plain oak on the wall above the desk where the deeds were kept, hung a small cracked schoolroom slate with a single line still on it in chalk, fixed under glass, never wiped. "I will do it if no man in the stable touches him without my seeing." My marriage settlement, Tancred called it when guests asked, and the best terms I ever agreed to. And then he would go and find his wife, who would be in the paddock, saying nothing to anybody, being obeyed.